The first lie people believe about us is that silence means peace. I believed it too, until the night I realized how loud silence can become when you are not allowed to answer your own questions. I was born into Ordnung the way a calf is born into a wooden stall, warm, narrow, unquestioned. The rules were already there before my first breath, unwritten, unargued, heavier than scripture because scripture could be discussed, but Ordnung could not. It lived in glances, in pauses, in the way my father cleared his throat when a neighbor's lantern burned a little too late at night. From the outside, our life looks clean, simple, holy. From the inside, it feels like walking barefoot on a floor swept so often you forget what dirt looks like until one splinter lodges itself deep under the skin. My earliest memory is not of prayer, but of sound. The creak of the barn door at dawn, the slow breathing of horses before the day claimed them, the scrape of my mother's broom against the wooden floor, always in the same rhythm, like she was afraid a different tempo might invite chaos inside our home. Smell came next. Hay, manure, soap made from fat and lye, bread cooling on linen cloths. These smells were not comforting, they were binding. They told me who I was before I ever asked. We had no mirrors in the way outsiders understand them, not just glass, reflection. You do not look at yourself for too long among the Amish. Looking inward is dangerous if you don't already know what you're supposed to find. As a boy, I was taught that curiosity is a form of pride. Pride leads to separation. Separation leads to exile. Not dramatic, not loud, but quiet and final. Shunning is not shouting, it is absence. It is your mother placing food on the table without meeting your eyes. It is your father speaking through your brother as if you are already dead. That fear is planted early, watered daily, and harvested whenever someone steps even slightly out of line. People ask me now, when they whisper or type their questions from glowing screens, do you really live without money? The truth is more complicated. We touch money, but we do not trust it. We earn, but we pretend not to see accumulation. Prosperity is allowed only if it looks like humility. A larger barn is acceptable. A larger house is suspicious. Electricity is forbidden not because it is evil, but because it connects. Connection is the true sin. I remember the first time I felt that forbidden pull. I was 14. I had been sent with my cousin Eli to deliver furniture to an English family just outside our district. Their house hummed, not loudly, but constantly, like an insect you couldn't swat. Inside, the air felt different, lighter, unstable, and then I saw it. A small rectangle in the man's hand, glowing like captured fire. His thumb moved, and the fire changed shape. Images, words, sounds, compressed into something he controlled. My chest tightened, not with desire alone, but fear. I knew without being told that whatever lived inside that object had no respect for Ordnung. It did not ask permission. It did not wait its turn. Eli noticed my staring and shifted closer to me, his voice barely a breath. Don't look too long, he said. It remembers. That night, back in my room, I lay awake listening to the house settle, wood popping, wind pressing against shutters. Somewhere, a dog barked and then went silent, as if corrected. I tried to pray, but my thoughts kept drifting, not toward rebellion, but toward understanding. Why must knowing more make a man less faithful? Why must the world be reduced in order for God to feel larger? As I grew older, the tension sharpened. Rumspringa came, that brief window outsiders romanticize as freedom. They think it is a wild escape. For most of us, it is a test we are meant to fail correctly. You may taste the outside world, but not swallow it. You may look, but not see too clearly. Those who do are rarely spoken of again. I watched friends disappear, not suddenly, but gradually. First a missed Sunday, then an empty bench, then a name spoken less and less, until it became unsafe to mention at all. Ordnung does not chase you, it waits. It knows that fear will do the work. Now I am a grown man. I have a wife who keeps her eyes lowered in public, and children who already know how not to ask certain questions. I am respected, trusted, and every morning when I button my plain shirt and step into the familiar smells of labor and livestock, I feel the weight of a secret growing heavier inside me, because silence is no longer peaceful. The second lie people believe is that we choose this life every day. Choice is a word that sounds powerful only to those who have more than one. In our community, obedience is not enforced with chains or locks. It is enforced with love, which is far more effective. Love that can be withdrawn, love that can turn its face away. From the time I was old enough to carry water, I understood that belonging was conditional. You are free to leave, they say. What they do not say is that you must leave everything that ever made you human behind. Sundays were the clearest demonstration of this invisible grip. The benches hard beneath us, the air thick with breath and wool, the sermons spoken in a cadence designed to lull the mind into agreement. Our ministers had no formal training. Authority came from age, from obedience, from never having asked the wrong question out loud. They spoke of humility as if it were a muscle that needed constant pain to stay strong. The more you suffered quietly, the holier you became. I learned early how to monitor myself, not just actions, thoughts. A wandering thought was a crack. A crack invited light. Light invited danger. So I trained my face to remain still. Even now, decades later, my reflection, when I accidentally catch it in a window, looks like a man carved from restraint. We had no internet, no news in the way the outside world understands it. Information traveled slowly and selectively, like a controlled infection. A barn fire 2 districts over, a boy who refused baptism, a family quietly relocating. Anything beyond that was dismissed as noise, temptation, or lies designed to test us. The outside world was described as loud, lonely, addicted, collapsing under its own freedom. And I believed it because believing required less courage than doubt. Yet doubt has a way of surviving even in sealed rooms. At night, after the lamps were blown out, I would lie awake and imagine the roads beyond our fields, roads that did not end in gravel and familiarity, roads with signs, lights, names. I had seen those roads during work trips, had felt how quickly the air seemed to move when cars passed. Speed was intoxicating, terrifying. We were taught that speed steals the soul's patience, but sometimes I wondered if patience was simply another word for delay. Money was another quiet contradiction. Officially, we lived simply. Unofficially, we were very good at business. Furniture, farming, construction. We traded with the English constantly, always careful not to look too successful. Cash passed through our hands like something unclean, quickly laundered into tools, land, animals. Saving was permitted, wanting was not. You could prepare for the future, but you were not allowed to imagine a different one. The pressure to conform intensified as I approached baptism. This was the moment that mattered. Before baptism, mistakes were youth. After baptism, mistakes were rebellion. I remember standing by the river, watching older men step into the water, their faces calm, resolved, as if they were not promising the rest of their lives away. My mother cried softly, not from fear, but pride. My father's hand rested on my shoulder like a weight I did not know how to shrug off. I delayed my decision longer than most. People noticed. Questions came wrapped in concern. Are you feeling well? Are you praying enough? The devil is patient, one elder told me quietly, his eyes never quite meeting mine. He waits for hesitation. During that time, something happened that changed the texture of my doubt. I was hired to help repair a roof for an English family, a widow living alone. She offered me water, then coffee. I refused the coffee, but I accepted the water. On her table sat a newspaper. I did not touch it. I did not need to. One headline was enough. Words about war, about decisions made far away that shaped lives like mine without ever knowing my name. That night, I dreamed of a world where I could know things without permission, where knowledge did not equal disobedience. I woke with my heart racing, not from desire, but from grief, because I understood then that the life I was being asked to commit to required a kind of blindness I was no longer sure I could maintain. Baptism day came anyway. I stepped into the cold water, feeling the eyes of my entire world on my back. The minister asked the questions. I knew the answers by heart. My mouth formed them automatically, like a prayer learned too young to question. But as the water closed over my head, something inside me did not feel cleansed. It felt buried, and buried things, I would soon learn, do not stay silent forever. The third lie is that once you are baptized, the questions stop. In truth, that is when they learn how to whisper. After baptism, the world did not change, but I did. My movements were watched more carefully. My words carried weight now. I was no longer a son or a youth. I was a man bound by promise. Every action became a testimony, not just of my faith, but of my family's worth. I felt it in the way conversations paused when I entered a room, as if my presence required adjustment. Respect is another form of surveillance. Marriage followed quickly. Love, among us, is practical. You marry someone suitable, steady, approved. Desire is acknowledged only as something to be managed. My wife is kind. That is not a lie. She moves through the house like a shadow that knows its shape well. Her hands are always busy, her thoughts carefully folded inward. On our wedding night, we spoke little. Silence had already taught us how to coexist. Domestic life wrapped around me like a familiar coat. Days filled with labor, evenings with routine, years stacking neatly on top of one another. Children arrived. With them came a deeper fear, not for myself, but for what I would pass on. I watched my son absorb the rules without knowing they were rules. I watched my daughter learn which questions earned smiles and which earned tightness around the mouth. Ordnung does not need to explain itself. It reproduces through observation. The outside world continued to brush against us, always at a distance, like weather we could sense but not predict. English drivers slowing to stare, tourists with cameras capturing our wagons as if we were artifacts. They thought they were seeing simplicity. They did not see the calculation behind every interaction. Which words were safe? Which topics were off limits? How much friendliness could be mistaken for openness? The first real crack in my obedience came from something small, a radio. It was not mine. It belonged to a coworker at a job site, an Englishman who left it running while we worked. I tried to ignore it, but sound travels, music, voices, fragments of a world that did not care whether I was ready to hear it. At one point, a news report came on. I caught pieces, elections, protests, debates about freedom, about control, about what a good life should look like. That night, I felt restless in a way prayer could not settle. I realized how carefully curated our ignorance was. It was not that the outside world was evil, it was that it was uncontrollable. You cannot filter reality without eventually fearing it. I began noticing things I had learned not to notice. The way certain families held more influence than others, how Ordnung shifted slightly depending on who you were related to, how violations were forgiven quietly for some and punished loudly for others. Ordnung was presented as eternal, but in practice it bent around power. The danger of noticing this is not anger, it is clarity. I started keeping these observations to myself. Silence became strategy rather than virtue. At church, I nodded. At home, I complied. Inside, I watched. I listened. I measured how far the boundaries truly extended. Fear still ruled me, but now it was accompanied by something else, calculation. Then came the moment I crossed a line I could not uncross. We were hired for a long-term project in a town farther than usual. We stayed in a small rented space during the week. One evening, alone, I noticed a device left behind by another worker. A smartphone, black, smooth, dead, I thought, until the screen lit up when I touched it. I froze. I knew every rule I was breaking just by holding it. I knew the weight of the consequences if discovered. Shunning, loss of family, loss of my children's faces turned away from me, and yet my thumb hovered. In that moment, I was not choosing rebellion. I was choosing sight. The screen opened. Images flowed. News. Maps. Words written by strangers who spoke freely, carelessly, without fear of silence being used against them. Time vanished. I felt my understanding stretch painfully, like muscles unused. When footsteps sounded in the hallway, I nearly dropped the device. I hid it. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it could be heard through the walls. For the first time in my life, I was afraid not of God, but of being seen, because now I knew something I was never meant to know. And once knowledge enters, Ordnung no longer feels like protection. It feels like a cage that knows you are awake. The fourth lie is that Ordnung is about God. I once believed that without hesitation. Now I know it is mostly about control, and control becomes visible only after you feel it tighten. After the phone, nothing returned to its proper place. I moved through my days as before, but everything felt slightly misaligned, like a picture hung crooked on the wall. I would be feeding the horses, listening to the familiar sounds of chewing and snorting, yet my mind replayed images I had seen in secret, cities glowing at night like constellations fallen to earth, people speaking openly about their doubts, their anger, their failures, without being erased for it. I did not become reckless. That is another fantasy outsiders have, that once an Amish man tastes the outside world, he runs toward it blindly. No, fear keeps us careful. I became quieter, more precise. I learned how to erase curiosity from my face while letting it burn freely inside my head. Guilt arrived next. Not the sharp kind that demands confession, but a slow, corrosive guilt that seeps into everything. When my children laughed, I wondered if I was betraying them by knowing more than they did. When my wife prayed aloud at night, her voice steady and sincere, I felt like a fraud standing beside her. I had not stopped believing in God. I had stopped believing that ignorance was holiness. The elders began visiting our home more frequently, always polite, always unannounced. They sat at our table, accepted coffee, asked about work, about my children's obedience, about my spiritual peace. These were not questions. They were instruments. Ordnung listens through people long before it speaks. I realized then how finely tuned the system was. You are rarely accused outright. Instead, you are surrounded by concern until you either correct yourself or disappear. The community does not need evidence. It senses deviation the way animals sense storms. One evening, after the elders left, my wife stood silently at the sink, her back to me. I wanted to tell her everything, the phone, the thoughts, the fracture growing inside me. But confession in our world is not a release. It is a weapon handed over willingly. So I said nothing. Silence again did its work. I began noticing others who carried the same quiet tension. A young man whose gaze lingered too long on passing cars. A woman who asked too many questions about life beyond our district under the cover of concern for a relative. We never acknowledged it openly. Recognition was subtle. A pause, a shared glance, a moment of understanding quickly buried. The more I understood Ordnung, the more dangerous it became. I saw how rebellion was not crushed. It was isolated. People who questioned were not argued with. They were starved of connection until doubt became unbearable. Most returned, some vanished. Their names were never mentioned again. I tested the boundaries carefully. A slightly different opinion during Bible study, a delayed response to an elder's request. Each time the reaction was immediate but gentle. Concern, reminders, scripture offered like a soft warning. Ordnung does not shout because it does not need to. The true threat was not punishment, it was loss. One night, I retrieved the phone again. I told myself it would be brief, just enough to understand what kind of world I was protecting my children from, or denying them. I searched for information about communities like mine, articles, videos, former Amish voices speaking with a clarity that both comforted and terrified me. Some spoke of freedom, others spoke of regret. Many spoke of loneliness so severe it nearly killed them. That was when the weight of my situation finally settled in. Leaving was not a door, it was a cliff, and staying meant slowly teaching my children the same controlled blindness that was now suffocating me. I shut the phone off and sat in the dark, listening to my own breathing. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I was honest, and realized how much honesty would cost. The next morning, an elder approached me at work. His voice was calm, friendly. "We've noticed you seem distracted lately," he said. And in that moment, I knew something irreversible had begun. The fifth lie is that there is still time once suspicion begins. There isn't. Time becomes a narrowing corridor, and every step echoes louder than the last. After the elder's words, I felt the walls move closer. Nothing changed outwardly, yet everything had. Conversations felt staged. Smiles lingered too long. I was no longer just living inside Ordnung. I was being measured against it. Sleep became shallow. I would wake before dawn, heart racing, convinced that someone was already awake, already watching. I destroyed the phone. Not dramatically. No anger. Just necessity. I took it apart piece by piece, burned what could burn, buried what could not, far from our land. As I worked, my hands were steady. My thoughts were not. Knowledge does not disappear just because the object that delivered it does. That was another lesson Ordnung never taught us. The elders' visits increased. So did the sermons about humility, obedience, unity. These messages were never aimed directly at me, which made them more effective. Public correction invites defense. Indirect warning invites self-erasure. I began volunteering more, speaking less, lowering my eyes again like a boy who had learned his place. At home, the strain seeped into everything. My wife noticed, though she never said it outright. She asked if I was tired, if work was heavy, if I wanted her to pray for me. Each question was an opening I could not step through. Telling her the truth would not make us closer. It would recruit her as an unwilling guard. One evening, my son asked me a question that stopped me cold. We were in the barn, the smell of warm hay thick in the air. He asked why we don't use electricity. If God created knowledge and skill, it was innocent, logical, the kind of question that blooms naturally before it is taught to die. I answered him the way I had been taught, carefully, safely. I watched his face accept the explanation, even as something behind his eyes dimmed slightly. In that moment, the true cost of obedience became unbearable. Not long after, a family we knew was shunned. Quietly, efficiently. One week they were there, the next they were ghosts. No one spoke of why. No one asked. Fear does not need explanation. I saw my future in their absence. The elders called me in soon after. No accusations, just questions layered with scripture. Concern dressed as care. They asked about my faith, my contentment, my commitment. I answered perfectly, too perfectly. I could see it then, the realization in their eyes. Order does not trust those who have learned how to perform it. When I left, my legs felt weak. I knew what came next. Monitoring, pressure, a choice disguised as mercy. That night, I sat alone long after everyone slept. I understood with brutal clarity that Ordnung had given me only two paths. One was silence forever, the other was loss beyond imagining. And for the first time, I considered a third path. Not escape, not rebellion, but but truth spoken where it was never meant to survive. I began to speak now, because once you see the cage, silence becomes collaboration, and I knew I was already running out of time. The final lie is that leaving, or staying, is the end of the story. It isn't. The story follows you, no matter which side of the fence you stand on. I am still here as I speak these words. That surprises people. They expect a clean ending, escape or exile, freedom or ruin. Real life inside Ordnung does not offer such clarity. It offers endurance. It offers compromise that feels like survival until you realize how much of yourself has been traded away. After that night, I did not announce anything. I did not run. I did not confess. Instead, I began doing the most dangerous thing possible in our world. I remembered. I held on to what I had seen and refused to let it dissolve into guilt or denial. Memory itself became resistance. Every day I perform obedience convincingly. I work, I pray aloud, I attend services, I submit. But inside, I measure every rule against what it claims to protect. Some protect community, some protect power. Ordnung pretends these are the same. I watch my children closely, not to control them, but to notice when curiosity appears. I do not crush it. I answer carefully, honestly where I can, leaving doors cracked just enough for light to slip through without drawing attention. It is a dangerous balance. One mistake could cost me everything. People ask if life without internet, without modern freedom, is simpler. No, it is quieter, and quiet can be merciless. There is no distraction from doubt here, no place to hide from yourself. In the outside world, noise numbs you. Inside, silence interrogates you. I still believe in God. That may be the most misunderstood part. Faith did not leave me, fear did. And without fear, Ordnung reveals itself plainly, not as evil, but as human. Built by people who were afraid of chaos, who confused control with holiness, who passed that fear down like inheritance. Some nights, I imagine leaving. I imagine stepping onto a road that does not know my name, where no one cares whether I am obedient, only whether I am honest. But then I imagine my children's faces turned away from me, taught to forget my voice. That is the punishment that keeps most of us faithful. So why am I telling you this? Because secrecy is the true foundation of this life. And secrecy only survives when no one speaks. I am not trying to destroy my people. I am trying to be truthful about them, about us. The world thinks we live without money, without technology, without freedom. The truth is harder. We live with constant surveillance disguised as love, with freedom defined so narrowly it feels like virtue, with curiosity treated as infection. If you are watching this from the outside, understand this. Not everyone here is asleep. Some of us are simply very good at pretending we are. And if one day I am gone, if my bench is empty, my name unspoken, remember this. I did not disappear because I wanted more. I disappeared because I finally refused to live without truth.